There's a saying out here in the deep transit corridors of Velun Station. Keep your eyes forward, keep your soul yours. I know, sounds like something you'd stitch onto a pillow. But I'm telling you right now, sitting here with 3 weeks of no sleep, 2 cracked ribs, and a mark on my wrist that won't stop glowing, that saying isn't poetry. It's a survival warning, and nobody told Cadden Marsh before it was too late. I was there. I saw the whole thing happen in about 4 seconds flat. 4 seconds that unraveled a man's entire life. Let me tell you what happened, because if I just carry this around in my chest for the rest of however long I've got left, I think I'll lose my mind out here between the stars. My name is Solon Dredd. I'm a cargo route auditor for the Mid-Rim Logistics Authority, which basically means I spend my life in transit hubs, counting crates, filing reports, and watching the galaxy move around me while I stay perfectly still. It's not glamorous work. Nobody writes songs about cargo auditors. But it takes me to places most people never see. Velun Station was one of them. If you've never passed through Velun, here's what you need to understand. It's not really a station in the way Earth people think of stations. It's not a clean, white, organized port with departure boards and coffee shops and little carts selling overpriced sandwiches. Velun is a city that happens to float in space. It sits at the junction of 3 major hyperline routes, the Aldris Corridor, the Pale Sweep, and what the locals call the Teeth, which means at any given moment you've got ships arriving from 47 different civilization clusters, all of them carrying passengers, cargo, contraband, diplomats, refugees, soldiers, merchants, priests, pilgrims, and things that don't fit into any of those categories. The population fluctuates between 300,000 and 500,000, depending on the transit season. The architecture is a mess, because it was built in layers over about 2 centuries, each species that settled here adding their own section on top of the last one. So you've got these enormous hexagonal Kethari housing blocks sitting directly on top of ancient Vorin stone corridors that predate half the current galactic treaty system. And above all of it, the newer human-built sections, all glass and reinforced polymer, and that slightly antiseptic lighting that makes everyone look mildly unwell. The air changes depending on which section you're in. That's the part people don't warn you about. The Kethari sections smell like iron and dried grass. The Vorin corridors have this low, constant humidity that makes your clothes feel slightly damp. The human sectors smell like recycled oxygen and bad vending machine food. And then there are the neutral zones, the big, wide market corridors and transit plazas where everyone mixes together, and those smell like everything at once. Spices you don't have names for. Incense from 6 different religious traditions burning at the same time. Engine coolant drifting up from the docking bays below. Street food. Sweat. Ozone from the overhead arc lights. It's overwhelming at first. After 2 or 3 visits, it becomes strangely comfortable. I'd been coming to Velun for about 4 years by the time this happened. I knew my way around the mid-levels, knew which food vendors wouldn't give me a digestive catastrophe, knew which transit corridors to avoid during the Kethari shift change when the foot traffic becomes genuinely dangerous. What I didn't know, what nobody in the human sectors ever really knew, because the information wasn't exactly advertised, was anything meaningful about the Velnahari. The Velnahari. Even the name sounds like something you'd hear in a story told around a fire. They have about a dozen names in different galactic dialects. The Kethari call them the Dusk-Touched. The Vorin call them something that roughly translates to the Beautiful Plague. Human xenoanthropologists, the few who have actually studied them up close and lived to publish, tend to go with Velnahari because that's what they call themselves, and that seems like the respectful starting point. Most humans on Velun just called them the vampires. Not as an insult, more as a shorthand, because the biological parallels were uncomfortable enough that everyone just quietly agreed on the nickname and moved on. Here's what I knew about them, standing in Velun Station on that particular Tuesday, which is what I'm still calling it in my head, even though Tuesday technically doesn't mean anything when you're 40 light years from the planet that invented the concept. I knew they were humanoid, roughly. The general shape, 2 legs, 2 arms, upright posture, is common enough across inhabited space that it stopped being remarkable. But the Velnahari had a quality to their humanoid shape that made them different from, say, the Kethari, who are technically also bipedal but look like nobody would ever mistake them for human. The Velnahari looked too human. That was the unsettling part. Tall, most of them between 6 and 7 feet. Extremely pale, not like someone who doesn't get enough sun, but like something that has never existed in sunlight at all, like the color of the inside of a seashell. Their features were sharp and symmetrical in a way that the human brain registers as beautiful before it registers as wrong. Dark eyes, most of them. Though some bloodlines have eyes that are deep amber or something close to silver. They don't need to breathe the same way most species do. They do. But they have extended breath-hold capacity that makes them unnervingly still in repose. And yes, they feed on biological compounds found in blood. Not in a gruesome horror film way, more in the way that some creatures need specific minerals that happen to be most concentrated in a particular biological source. But the mechanism is real. The dependency is real. And the Galactic Treaty System had about 11 different clauses specifically addressing Velnahari feeding rights, consent protocols, and the legal categories around what they called the bond. Which brings me to the single most important piece of information. I didn't know that Tuesday. The bond. I should explain something before I get to the moment itself, because without it, nothing that follows will make sense. The Velnahari have what their own cultural literature calls Velkan, loosely translated as the binding site. It's biological, documented, studied extensively by xenobiologists, though not completely understood. The short version is this. Velnahari culture is built around a specific form of pair bonding that is, unlike most pair bonding in the galaxy, partially involuntary. When a Velnahari is in a state of full exposure, which is a specific physiological condition that I'll explain in a moment, and makes direct visual contact with another being, something activates. In both of them. It's neurochemical on the Velnahari side, involving compounds their skin releases in that state. It's nobody's entirely sure what it is on the other side, but it works across species. The bond, once initiated, is not romantic in origin. It's deeper than that, more territorial, more ancient. The Velnahari bonded to you is aware of your location within about a half kilometer. They can sense your emotional state, your distress, your fear. And when the bond is new in the first months, it creates a compulsion in the bonded being to remain near their Velnahari. Not a controlled compulsion, not something you can logic your way out of. A pull deep in the chest, like gravity in a direction you didn't know existed. Full exposure means unclothed, which the Velnahari consider a state of extreme ritual vulnerability, not sexual in their cultural framework, but deeply sacred. It's done only in specific ceremonial contexts, or in the rare case of emergency. The reason it activates with eye contact specifically is buried in their evolutionary history, some long-ago predator that attacked during the bonding ceremony, which meant the species eventually developed the bond as a protective mechanism. Someone sees you in full exposure, you have a partner now. Evolutionarily, that meant you had someone to protect you. The problem, the catastrophic, life-altering problem, is that this information was not on any standard Velun station visitor briefing. It was not on the arrival terminal screens. It was not in the Mid-Rim Logistics Authority orientation packet. It was not posted anywhere near the Velnahari Cultural Quarter, which was technically in the upper east section of the station's third tier, but which, because Velnahari travel extensively and often and sometimes in a hurry, meant that occasionally, very occasionally, you might encounter one of them somewhere else. Like the maintenance subcorridor between level 7 and level 8, which is exactly where Cadden Marsh was walking at approximately 3:40 station time, heading back to his bunk after a double shift on the docking bay audit floor. I was 20 feet behind him. I want to be clear about that, because some people have asked me since why I didn't warn him, and the answer is 20 feet behind him, in a maintenance corridor at 3:40. I wasn't paying attention to anything except the floor in front of me and the ache in my lower back, and the fact that I was going to eat an entire bowl of protein noodles the second I got back to my quarters. The corridor between 7 and 8 is a service passage. Most transit passengers don't use it. Cargo staff use it as a shortcut because it cuts 12 minutes off the walk between the docking audit office and the crew residential block. It's not wide, maybe 4 feet across. Low ceiling, overhead pipes, orange utility lighting that gives everything the color of old rust. There are recessed doorways along the left side, access panels mostly, for the station's environmental and electrical systems. Some of them are larger than they look. Maintenance bays, basically. We were moving through one of the longer straight stretches. Cadden maybe 20 feet ahead of me, walking with his head down, hood up. The specific posture of a man who is 90% asleep on his feet, when one of the maintenance bay doors on the left side slid open. Not aggressively, not loudly. It just opened, like someone had pressed a release from inside. And she came out. I stopped walking immediately. Not because I processed what I was seeing. I hadn't processed anything yet. I stopped because the movement was sudden and unexpected in a place where movement wasn't supposed to happen, and the human startle response kicked in before my brain caught up. Cadden, 20 feet ahead, did not stop. He heard the door, he half-turned, he looked. And that was it. That was the 4 seconds. She was Velnahari. That much was immediately obvious, even though I'd never seen one this close before. There's a quality to them, something in the way they carry themselves, even in a moment of apparent disorientation, that registers in the human nervous system as a warning and an invitation at the same time. Some deep, evolutionary part of your brain that has nothing to do with rational thought. She was tall, 6'3", maybe 6'4". Her skin was that particular Velnahari pale, not white, not exactly, more like the color of moonlight on still water. Her hair was dark and loose and slightly damp, like she'd just come from water, and it fell across her shoulder in a way that looked completely unstudied. She was in full exposure. She had nothing on. Not a garment, not a wrap, not even the ceremonial minimal coverings that Velnahari sometimes wear in transitional states. Whatever had happened in that maintenance bay, whatever emergency or accident or circumstance had caused her to come through that door in that state, she had had no time to prepare. Her eyes, when they found Cadden, which happened in about the first half-second of the 4 seconds, were amber. This deep, warm amber that looked lit from inside, like something was burning behind them. And they locked onto Cadden's face. He had turned toward her. He was looking directly at her. I want to pause here because I know what some people think when they hear this part of the story. I know what assumption gets made. This wasn't about anything crude. I was standing there watching it happen, and the thing that struck me, the thing that has stayed with me through 3 weeks of trying to make sense of it, was how not that it was. She looked startled. She looked disoriented. There was something almost frightened in her expression, which I wouldn't have expected from what little I knew about the Velnahari. And Cadden didn't leer. He didn't smirk. He wasn't some guy in a corridor taking in a view he wasn't supposed to have. He looked the way you look when you nearly step on a cat in the dark and both of you freeze. Pure, mutual surprise. His hood had partially fallen, and I could see his face clearly, and what was on it was shock. And then, this was the part that mattered, this immediate, instinctive, very human sorry, I'm not looking move where he turned his head away. He turned his head away after maybe 3 seconds. But the eye contact had already happened. And by then, the 4 seconds were done. What happened next was slow in the way that disasters are always slow when you're watching them and can't do anything. She stood very still for a moment, perfectly still, and then she made a sound, not words, not any language I recognized, just a single, low, melodic tone that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. A vibration, almost. Cadden had turned his face away and was standing with his back half to her, one hand raised in the universal gesture of I see nothing. I apologize, I am leaving. Wait, she said. In standard, perfect, unaccented standard. He stopped, because when someone says wait with that particular quality in their voice, you stop. Every social instinct you have just stops your feet. Look at me, she said. I really shouldn't, Cadden said, which, in the circumstances, was almost funny. You already did, she said, and there was something in her voice when she said it. Not anger, not anything as simple as anger. It was something more complicated, something that sounded like the very beginning of resignation. Cadden turned around slowly. He kept his eyes carefully above her shoulder line, which I will say is an extremely Cadden thing to do, because I've known the man for 2 years, and he is without question the most instinctively polite human being I have ever met in my life. She had not moved. She was standing in the doorway of the maintenance bay, and now there was something on her wrist, her left wrist, that hadn't been there a moment ago. Or maybe it had been there and I hadn't noticed it. A marking. Like a sigil, but alive, faintly luminescent, amber gold, shifting slowly the way ink moves in water. And on Cadden's left wrist, I could see it from 20 feet away, even in the orange corridor light. The same marking was appearing. Emerging from his skin, like something surfacing from deep water. He looked down at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What is that?" And she said very quietly, "That is the Velcon." A pause. "What's the Velcon?" Cadden asked. Another pause, longer. "You are bound to me now," she said. And Cadden, being Cadden, said, "I'm sorry, could you say that again?" I started moving forward, not running. I didn't run because my brain was still 3 steps behind my feet, and running felt too dramatic, like I'd be committing to something I didn't fully understand yet. By the time I reached them, she had stepped back into the maintenance bay doorway and found, from somewhere inside, a length of dark fabric that she was wrapping around herself. Not hurried, deliberate, like wrapping a wound. "Solon," Cadden said when he saw me coming. His voice had a quality I'd never heard from him before. Flat and careful, like someone trying to carry water in cupped hands and not spill any. "What happened?" I said, which was, given what I just watched happen, possibly the least useful question I've ever asked. "I don't know," he said. I looked at his wrist. The marking was fully formed now. Amber gold, the width of 2 fingers, wrapping once around his left wrist and ending in a small closed loop just below his palm. It wasn't raised like a burn. It was flat, like it was part of him, like it had always been there. I looked at her wrist, the same. "Are you Velnahari?" I said to her, which was also, in retrospect, not a great question. She looked at me with those amber eyes, and there was something almost weary in them, in the way very old, very intelligent things sometimes look when they're asked things they consider obvious. "Yes," she said. "What just happened to him?" I said. She looked at Cadden, then back at me. "He saw me," she said. "In my full state, we made eye contact. The Velcon initiated." A pause. It was not my intention. I was in the bay because the corridor above flooded and I could not reach my quarters without passing through. I did not expect." She stopped. Something crossed her face. "I did not expect anyone to be here at this hour." "Okay," I said slowly. "Okay, what does bound mean? What does that actually mean in practical terms?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "It means," she said finally, "that he is now under my protection, and I am under his. It means that the connection between us is permanent. He will feel my presence, I will feel his. When one of us is in danger, the other will know." She paused. "It means that I am responsible for him, and he." "I'm what?" Cadden said. "You are claimed," she said, and she said it without particular drama, just as a fact. A weight dropped into the conversation. Cadden looked at his wrist. "By accident," he said. "Yes," she said. A long silence. "I'm Cadden Marsh," he said finally, "because what else do you say?" She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I can feel your name." And then, after a moment, "I am Velisara of the Nahari Aldri bloodline, 3rd ascendant of the House of Korvan." "Hi," said Cadden. I stayed with them for the next 3 hours, because I didn't know what else to do, and because Cadden looked like a man standing at the edge of something very tall, and I wasn't going to leave him there alone. We ended up in one of the neutral zone common rooms on level 6. A low, warm space with mixed seating, arranged for multiple species body types. The kind of room that's always open because the station never really sleeps and someone always needs a place to sit. She sat across from us. She'd found her full clothing from wherever in the maintenance bay she'd left it. A long, dark, layered garment that covered her from throat to floor, which I later learned was standard Velnahari traveling dress. Nothing that would draw attention in a busy station corridor. Cadden had not stopped looking at his wrist. "Is it permanent?" he asked. "The mark?" "Yes," she said. "And what you said, the feeling, the pull, that's permanent too." "It will settle," she said. "In the early weeks it is strong, disorienting. It will become more background, but it does not go away." "In the early weeks," Cadden repeated. He sounded like a man reading a sentence in a foreign language, working out the grammar. "Weeks? How long does, I mean, what's the timeline here?" She looked at him with an expression that I was starting to learn was her version of careful, like she was choosing each word from a limited supply. "The Velkan is lifelong," she said. Cadden put both hands flat on the table in front of him. "Okay," he said, "okay." "You should know," she said, and there was something that almost functioned like apology in her voice, "that I did not choose this. I do not mean," she paused. "I do not mean that as a dismissal of what you are. I mean only that I understand your position. An accidental bond is not without precedent, but it is rare. And I understand that for a human who has no cultural framework for this, it must feel like the universe just grabbed me by the wrist and stapled me to a stranger," Cadden said. Something happened in her expression, just a flicker, almost like amusement, but older and quieter than amusement. "Yes," she said. "Approximately that. I want to tell you about Cadden Marsh, because I think it matters." He was 31, from New Reykjavik, which is one of the second-generation Earth colony settlements on Kolath IV, a cold, northern, rocky planet that produces people who are generally very calm in a crisis and very bad at talking about their feelings. He'd been doing docking bay work for 6 years, came to it after a couple of years in the outer rim salvage industry, which is the kind of job that either breaks you or makes you very hard to rattle. Cadden was very hard to rattle. Physically, he was ordinary. Medium height, medium build, the kind of face that's hard to describe specifically because it's constructed of averages. Brown hair he never quite managed to keep tidy. Hands that were permanently rough from a decade of manual work. A scar on his left chin from a piece of equipment that had misbehaved 3 years ago on the Pale Sweep run. He was the kind of man who helped people move things, who remembered what everyone in the crew was allergic to, who stayed late when something needed finishing. Not because he wanted recognition, just because it was the thing that needed doing and he was there. That's who he was. That's who the galaxy had just grabbed by the wrist and bound to an ancient alien being in a service corridor at 3:40. The conversation in the common room went on until close to sunrise, which on Velun Station means the overhead lighting slowly shifted through a cycle designed to mimic natural dawn, because prolonged total artificial light is bad for most biological species' psychological health. She told us both, some of what the bond meant in practical terms. He would feel her within about 600 meters, not a precise locating ability, more like a directional sense, like knowing which way is north. He'd know roughly where she was, and whether she paused looking for the word well. That was the word she chose. He'd know if she wasn't well. She would have the same from him. The compulsion to proximity, the pull, would be strongest in the first 4 to 6 weeks. After that, the nervous system adapted. The bond didn't weaken, but it became integrated rather than intrusive. She was on Velun for a diplomatic function. She was meant to leave in 9 days on the Kethari fast line to the Korvan homeworld. The bond would stretch across distance. There was no physical barrier, but the pull would be difficult, uncomfortable. She said this without particular emotion, but I noticed she was watching Cadden's face carefully when she said it. "So you're leaving," Cadden said. "My function requires it," she said. "And I'm what? I just stay here and feel like something's wrong for 9 days while you're gone. Months while you're gone." "It is not pain," she said. "What is it?" She thought about this for a moment. "It is like a word that is on the edge of your memory," she said. "Present, not quite reachable, persistent." Cadden looked at her. "That sounds miserable," he said. "Yes," she said, and this time the acknowledgement was quiet and genuine. "It is." At around 600 station time, I finally excused myself. My body was past arguing. I needed horizontal time or I was going to be useless to everyone. Cadden stayed. I didn't ask why. I could see from across the table that something was already different about the space between them, not warm, not romantic, nothing so simple but present. Like there was a wire between them that hadn't been there before, and they were both very carefully aware of it. I found out what happened next from Cadden himself, in pieces over the following days. He spent the rest of that morning with Velasara. They talked more than he'd expected. She asked him things about himself with a directness that he said felt strange at first, like being interviewed, but then gradually felt more like she was taking inventory. Assembling a picture of who he was, because she was now permanently connected to him, and she wanted to understand what she was connected to. He asked her things back. haltingly at first, because there's a particular kind of awkwardness in asking someone about their world when you've just accidentally bound your life to theirs, and you're trying very hard not to be weird about it. She was, he said, not what he'd expected. He hadn't known what to expect exactly. Something colder, maybe, more detached. The Velnahari reputation in casual human conversation tended toward the unsettling, beautiful, dangerous, keep your distance. That kind of reputation. She was direct. She was precise with language in a way that felt respectful rather than clinical, like she was choosing accuracy over ease, which, Cadden said, was something he actually valued. He'd spent enough time around people who said easy things that weren't quite true to appreciate someone who said difficult things with precision. She was also, he discovered, nearly 400 years old. He processed that for about an hour before he could say anything useful about it. 400, he said. 387, she said, in your years. And I'm 31. Yes. That's, he stopped, started again. That doesn't bother you, the difference. She looked at him with those amber eyes. The Velcon does not consult for differences, she said. It simply is. On the third day, something happened. I wasn't there for it. Cadden told me afterward, and I could tell from the way he talked about it that it had shaken something in him, not frightened him, exactly. Shaken loose a piece of his certainty about how the world worked. He was on shift, the docking audit floor lower level, where the big cargo intake manifests get processed. Loud, busy, the kind of work that requires enough focused attention that you don't really have bandwidth for anything else. He said it started as a discomfort, a specific directional discomfort that had nothing to do with anything in the audit office. He'd been feeling the bond for 3 days by then, that north-pointing sense, the background awareness, and this was different from that. This was sharper, more urgent. He said he knew exactly what it was before he could articulate it. He set down his tablet. His supervisor asked him where he was going. He said he didn't know, which was true and not true at the same time. He followed the pull-up 4 levels and through 2 transit corridors to the Velnahari Cultural Quarter. There was a situation in progress. 2 Galactic Union enforcement officers, big Kethari full armor, had Velisara against the wall of a corridor. They were holding her wrists. The specific Velnahari prohibition against unauthorized physical restraint, which is a formal diplomatic protection, not just a cultural preference, was being violated, apparently on the grounds that someone had reported a Velnahari moving through a restricted area without authorization, and the officers had decided to detain first and verify later. Velisara was very still, the stillness of something holding itself together by an act of will. Cadden walked into the corridor. This is the part I want to be careful about, because I wasn't there and I'm working from what he told me, and what he told me was not detailed. He's not a man who tells stories about himself in ways that make himself look good. He gives you the shape of things and you fill in the rest. The shape of it was this. He walked in. He identified himself as Midrim Logistics Authority, Transit Level Audit, which gave him a specific credential class that had, by an administrative quirk, slightly more lateral authority in neutral zone disputes than standard Galactic Union enforcement. He knew this. He'd used it exactly once before for a completely unrelated crate dispute. He told the officers that the individual they were detaining was registered under the Velnahari Diplomatic Transit Accord, Article 9, and that unauthorized physical restraint of a registered diplomatic traveler was a Level 3 violation that he was now formally documenting. He took out his audit tablet and he wrote it down. The officers looked at him, then at each other, then at Velisara. Then they let her go. It wasn't heroic in the way that word usually means. There was no fighting, no dramatic confrontation. There was just a man who knew a specific administrative rule and applied it with total conviction at the exact moment it mattered. Velisara looked at him when they were alone in the corridor. "How did you know?" she asked. "I felt," he stopped, tried again. "Something felt wrong, I followed it." She looked at his wrist, at the marking. "You came because of the Velcon," she said. "I came because you were in trouble," he said. "Those are the same thing." He thought about it for a moment. "Maybe," he said, "but the second one feels more like a choice." She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said, in a voice that was very careful and very precise, "You are not what I expected either." The next several days were complicated. Cadden still had his job, his life, his shift schedule and his crew accommodations and his regular Tuesday evening card game with the maintenance team on level 4. The bond didn't pause those things. It just sat underneath all of them, this constant ambient awareness of where Velisara was, what direction, whether she was well. He said the strangest part was how quickly he normalized it. 3-4 days in and it had become just part of how he understood space. A seventh sense, not overwhelming, just present, like knowing whether there's light behind you without turning around. They met every evening in the neutral common room. Not by arrangement, or at least not explicitly by arrangement. They both just ended up there. He brought bad synthetic coffee because that was all the vending unit near his quarters offered. She didn't eat or drink anything human-compatible, but she didn't comment on the coffee. They talked. She told him about Korvan, about what the Velnahari homeworld looked like. He said she described it in a way that made him want to see it, which he found deeply inconvenient given the circumstances. Dark skies, she said. Very few of what humans would call bright stars because Korvan sat in a dense nebula region and the light that made it through was scattered and ambient, always present, never direct. Everything slightly lit always. Never true darkness, but never true brightness. He told her about Kolith IV, about what winter is like on a cold colony world, the specific silence of heavy snowfall at night, the way the settlement lights look from the ridge above town, the feeling of being somewhere that's still being built by the people living in it. She listened to everything he said with absolute attention, the full focus of those amber eyes, which he said was something he'd never experienced from anyone before, being listened to that completely, and which he found simultaneously comforting and unnerving. On the 5th day, he asked her about the feeding. He'd been working up to it. He told me later he'd been carrying the question around for 4 days, turning it over, looking for the right moment which never arrived, so eventually he just said it. "The blood thing," he said, "the feeding, is that, do you need?" He stopped. "I'm asking it wrong, I'm asking whether the bond creates an obligation in that direction," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "The Velcon is a connection, not a feeding compact. Those are separate contracts under our law." A pause. I would not ask that of you, not without choice, not without extensive conversation and consent rituals that take, in their traditional form, about 3 months. 3 months, he said. It is considered a significant commitment. "Yeah," he said, "that tracks." She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it. "But," she said, "you should know that the bond means I am aware of your biological state. Your blood, the composition of it, I don't." She stopped, the carefulness coming back into her voice. "I don't want to cause you distress by saying this, but honesty seems preferable to you discovering it another way." "You can smell it," he said. "I can sense it," she said. "Yes, and yours is..." She paused in a way that seemed deliberate. "Yours is unusual." "Unusual how?" She looked at his wrist, at the Velcon mark. "Velcon responds to compatibility," she said. "Not preference, not choice. Biological compatibility across several dimensions that we don't entirely understand. It found you for a reason." Cadden looked at his wrist. "My blood is the right kind," he said, flat, trying to decide how he felt about that. "That is one element," she said carefully. "But not the only one. Compatibility in our biology encompasses more than that, more than the physical." She paused. "The Velcon does not trigger on blood alone. If it did, it would trigger constantly. It requires something larger." "What?" Cadden said. She looked at him for a long moment. "We don't entirely know," she said. "That is the honest answer. Centuries of study and we still don't entirely know. What we know is that it is rare, and that when it happens, it is..." Another pause, choosing. "It is not accidental in the way that the word accidental implies meaninglessness." The common room was quiet around them. Distant station sounds, the hum of the environmental systems, someone laughing on the other side of the room. "So it was an accident," Cadden said slowly, "but not a mistake." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "that is yes, precisely." On the 7th day, 3 things happened. The first, a Velnahari elder arrived at Velun Station. Velnahari elders don't travel casually. When one shows up somewhere, it means something formal is happening. This one, ancient, immense in presence in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, with silver eyes and a stillness about him that made the air near him feel heavier, was Velisara's elder brother, the first ascendant of the House of Corvan. His name was Velkarath. He arrived, apparently, because word had reached Corvan through channels Cadden, and I don't fully understand, that Velisara had formed an accidental bond with a human. I was in the common room when he arrived. I was there because Cadden had asked me to be, which I think was partly because he wanted a witness and partly because he didn't want to feel outnumbered. Velkarath sat across from Cadden and looked at him for a very long time without speaking. Cadden, to his absolute credit, looked back without flinching. Finally, Velkarath said, in standards so formal and precise it sounded like something being read from a very old document, "You are the one who saw her." "Yes," Cadden said. "Tell me," Velkarath said, "what you were doing in that corridor at that hour." "Finishing a shift," Cadden said, "going back to my quarters." "Not seeking her out." "I didn't know she existed," Cadden said. Velkarath looked at the mark on Cadden's wrist. At Velisara, who was sitting beside Cadden in a way that I noticed was closer than their previous conversations. Not touching, but close. "You are a cargo auditor," Velkarath said. "Yes." "You have no formal status in the galactic diplomatic structure." "No." "You have no family connections to any species, with a standing Velnahari compact." "No." Velkarath was quiet, then he said, "The Velkon does not care about any of this." "That's what I've been told," Cadden said. Another long silence. "You helped her," Velkarath said, 3 days ago with the enforcement officers." "I knew a rule," Cadden said. "I used it." "Why?" Cadden looked at Velisara briefly, back at Velkarath. "Because she was in trouble," he said. "And I could do something about it." Velkarath looked at him for a very long time. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stood. He placed his right hand flat on the table, which I learned later is a formal Velnahari gesture of acknowledgement, not approval exactly, but recognition. Recognition of something real. "The bond is real," Velkarath said, somewhat unnecessarily. "You carry it correctly." Cadden looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Velkarath said, "that you have not fought it, you have not denied it, you have not treated it as a thing to be escaped." He paused. "Many who receive an accidental Velkon spend months in denial, seeking a way to break it. It cannot be broken. But the attempt damages the bond and damages the bound." His silver eyes moved to Velisara, "and damages the one who must feel that attempt from the inside." Cadden looked at Velisara. Something passed between them that I can't describe properly because it happened in the space between two people, and I was outside it. "I didn't know it could do that," Cadden said quietly. "No," she said, "I didn't tell you." "You should have." "Yes," she said, "I should have." The second thing that happened on the 7th day. The Galactic Union Enforcement Office on Velun Station filed a formal inquiry into the incident in the Velnahari Cultural Quarter corridor. Not a complaint, an inquiry, which was supposedly routine. Except the inquiry included a subpoena for Cadden's audit tablet records, and when Cadden's supervisors got wind of it, there was a meeting about whether his intervention had been within his authority, and whether Midrim Logistics Authority wanted to be involved in a potential diplomatic incident. I sat in that meeting. I was technically a witness to the original incident, the bond's initiation, and the legal questions were starting to spread outward like cracks from an impact point. The meeting was 3 hours long and involved 4 different authority classifications and a lot of very careful corporate language. At the end of it, Cadden's supervisor, a methodical, unflappable woman named Teres Ulaka, who I had previously believed incapable of being surprised by anything, looked at Cadden across the table and said, "The mark on your wrist, the Velnahari bond mark, is that accurate documentation?" "Yes," Cadden said. Teres Ulaka looked at it for a long moment. "Velnahari bondholders," she said carefully, "have certain protections under the Midrim Transit Accord. You know that." "I didn't," Cadden said. "Specifically," she said, pulling up something on her tablet, A human registered as Velkon bonded to a diplomatic class Velnahari individual has, as a secondary protection, extended authority within the diplomatic transit framework. You weren't just acting under MRLA credentials when you intervened. She paused. You were acting under combined authority. Cadden stared at her. So the inquiry closes, she said, because you had the authority you claimed, and then some. Another long silence. The bond gave me clearance, Cadden said slowly. The bond made you legally part of her diplomatic classification, Terrace said. Yes. Cadden sat back in his chair, and I could see him, visibly, in real time, reconsidering several things. The third thing that happened on the 7th day was the smallest of the three, but it's the one that matters most to me when I think about this story. It was late, the common room again. Velkorath had gone to his quarters. Terrace had left after the meeting. It was just the three of us, Cadden, Velisara, and me, though I was on the other side of the room pretending to do paperwork, which was only partly pretense. Velisara's departure was in 2 days, the Kethari fast line, back to Korvan. Cadden was looking at the mark on his wrist. You're still leaving, he said, not a question. The diplomatic function requires it, she said. The elders expected us both to return. Velkorath came here partly to formally acknowledge the bond and ensure it was registered with the house. She paused. You could come. He looked up. To Korvan, he said. Your employment is transferable, she said. MRLA has presence on Korvan. The transit function there is significant. You looked that up, he said. A pause. Yes, she said. He looked at his wrist, at the mark at her. We've known each other for 7 days, he said. Yes, she said. And before that, 4 seconds. Yes. And somehow, he stopped. Is this what you want specifically, not what the bond wants, what you want? She was quiet for a while, long enough that I looked up from my pretend paperwork. I have been bonded once before, she said finally, very quietly. It was a long time ago. He was Velnahari. He died. The bond does not break at death. It simply becomes. She stopped. It becomes an absence that you feel in the exact shape of the presence that was. Cadden didn't say anything. He was listening with the same full attention she'd given him. For 200 years, she said, I have been very careful. About which corridors I walk through, about where I am when I am in full state. I was careful because the Velkon had already changed my life once, and I did not know if I had. She paused. I did not know if I was ready for it to change my life again. She looked at her wrist, at the mark. I was not careful enough, she said. For one moment in one maintenance corridor, I was not careful enough. She looked at him. But I find that I am not distressed by this, and I want to understand why I am not distressed by this, and I think the best way to understand it is to not run from it. The common room was very quiet. Okay, Cadden said, okay. He looked at his wrist one more time. Then he looked up at her. Tell me about Korvan, he said. The dark skies again. Tell me more about that. And she did. I went back to my paperwork, the real kind this time, and I let them have the rest of that night. In the morning, 6 hours before the fast line departure, Cadden handed in his Velun Station transfer request. Midrim Logistics Authority, Korvan Sector Office. Open position, which Terrace Ulaka confirmed with an expression that suggested she'd been expecting this since the meeting. He packed in 40 minutes. He didn't own much. Cadden never owned much. A duffel bag, his audit kit, a small framed photo of the Callith IV settlement from the ridge, which he wrapped in a shirt and put at the bottom of the bag. I walked with him to the Level 3 transit terminal. The fast line gate was at the far end. I could see Velisara already there and Velkorath beside her, waiting. You're doing this, I said, not a judgment, just confirming. Yeah, he said. The man who went into that corridor to go to sleep, I said. He's going to a planet made of ambient light and no direct stars. Cadden was quiet for a moment. The man who went into that corridor was fine, he said. He was okay. Good job, decent crew, regular card games on Tuesday, he paused. He was fine. But, I said, he thought about it. You know that saying they have here, keep your eyes forward, keep your soul yours. Yeah, I said. I think that's wrong, he said. I think sometimes you're supposed to look. I think sometimes you look and the whole thing changes, and that's not a mistake. That's the point. I looked at him. That's the most words I've heard you say at once in 2 years, I said. He almost smiled. Travel changes you, he said. Come visit sometime, I'll show you dark skies. We shook hands. He walked toward the gate. Belisara saw him coming. Something in her posture shifted, subtle, like the light shifting when something large moves close to a lamp. The amber eyes came to him. Velkarath said something to her. She replied without looking away from Cadden. And Cadden looked right at her, directly at her, on purpose. This time with a full 8 seconds, and a completely different outcome. I stood at the level 3 railing and watched the fast line gate close behind them. The corridor was empty in that particular way that transit corridors get when the last departure of a particular route has just gone. Like the space needs a moment to remember how to be still. I was standing there with 2 cracked ribs I'd gotten from a completely separate incident involving a malfunctioning cargo loader. A wrist that was still perfectly unmarked, because I'd been 20 feet away and looking at the floor, and a story I was already trying to figure out how to tell. 4 seconds. A maintenance door that opened because a corridor above it flooded. A man who couldn't quite bring himself to look away. I've thought about it every day since. About what the universe decides and what we decide, and whether those are actually different categories. About what it means to be chosen by something that doesn't ask permission. About whether bound is a limitation or a starting point. I don't have clean answers. I don't think the universe hands those out. What I know is this. Somewhere right now, between 40 light years and however far the fast line carries you before the first stop, there is a Velnahari woman nearly 4 centuries old and a human man who is 31 and keeps his coffee synthetic and packs his whole life in one duffel bag. And on both their wrists, there is a mark the color of amber and starlight. And neither of them put it there on purpose. And neither of them is trying to take it off. That's the part that stays with me. Not the accident, not the strangeness, not even the mark. The part that stays with me is they're not trying to take it off.